Get down! Incoming plasma barrage! Colonel Darius Blackwood tackled the evacuation coordinator behind a concrete barrier as the sky above New Geneva Colony turned white-hot. The first wave of Corvin bombardment struck the residential district with surgical precision, vaporizing buildings while leaving the streets intact. Blackwood felt the heat wash over them even from 3 kilometers away, his tactical visor automatically darkening to prevent retinal damage. "How many civilians are still in the target zone?" 40,000, sir, Lieutenant Hayes gasped, his voice cracking as another section of the city disappeared in a flash of superheated plasma. "The evacuation transports can't get close enough. The Corvins are maintaining a perfect orbital firing pattern. They're not trying to destroy the infrastructure, just the people." Hayes pulled up his scanner readings with shaking hands. "Colonel, I've never seen anything like this. They're using surgical strikes to eliminate population while preserving every building, every road, every piece of machinery." Blackwood watched through his binoculars as the alien fleet maintained perfect formation above the colony, their crystalline ships glowing with accumulated energy. Each plasma strike lasted exactly 30 seconds, followed by precisely 45 seconds of cooling time before the next barrage. It was methodical, efficient, and absolutely terrifying in its clinical precision. "This isn't warfare," he muttered, feeling sick as he realized what he was witnessing. "This is pest control. They're clearing the land for new tenants." The bombardment continued for 6 hours, each strike eliminating another district while leaving the colony's power grid, transportation network, and manufacturing facilities completely untouched. By the time the Corvin fleet departed, 40,000 human beings had been reduced to ash and vapor, but New Geneva's infrastructure remained pristine and ready for immediate occupation. Blackwood coordinated the evacuation of the few hundred survivors who had been outside the target zones, but his mind was already analyzing the tactical implications of what he'd witnessed. During the 3-day journey back to Earth, Blackwood compiled his after-action report with growing horror. The attack patterns showed clear evidence of advanced reconnaissance and detailed population mapping. The Corvins had known exactly where to strike for maximum human casualties while preserving maximum colonial value. This level of precision required months of preparation and intelligence gathering, suggesting that New Geneva wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger operational plan. Earth Command's emergency briefing room buzzed with tense energy as Admiral Harrison reviewed the intercepted Corvin communications that had arrived through diplomatic channels. The translation algorithms had worked overtime to process the alien command frequencies, and the results painted a picture of systematic genocide on a scale that dwarfed anything in galactic history. "Gentlemen, what we're looking at is called the Territorial Optimization Protocol," Harrison announced, his voice heavy with the weight of the intelligence. "It's a 30-year plan to relocate 12 billion Corvan civilians onto human-occupied worlds." General Morrison pulled up the holographic display showing targeted human colonies. 300 worlds glowed red on the tactical map, representing 50 billion human lives marked for extermination. "Our xenobiology experts confirm that the Corvan homeworlds are experiencing ecological collapse due to industrial contamination and overpopulation. They need new territory not for expansion, but for species survival. From their perspective, we're squatters occupying real EPAM. State they need to prevent their own extinction." Blackwood stood up as the implications hit him. "Sir, this changes everything about how we respond. If they're fighting for species survival, they won't stop until they've achieved their colonization objectives, or we've made it too costly to continue. Traditional military deterrence won't work against an enemy facing extinction." He activated his personal data pad, showing the tactical analysis he'd compiled during the journey from New Geneva. "But they have a weakness. Look at the precision of their attacks." The room fell silent as Blackwood highlighted the coordination patterns from the Massacre. Every Corvin operation follows identical timing, targeting, and execution protocols. That level of synchronization across multiple star systems requires centralized command and control. Intelligence indicates they're using something called the Strategic Coordination Matrix, a galaxy-spanning network that processes operational data from thousands of simultaneous colonization efforts. Dr. Patterson from the Intelligence Division nodded grimly. We've been monitoring their communications for months. The Matrix processes everything: target selection, resource allocation, fleet positioning, timing coordinates. It allows unprecedented coordination of large-scale operations across interstellar distances. She paused, meeting Blackwood's eyes. But it also creates a single point of catastrophic failure. If we could disrupt the data flow or overload the processing network with conflicting information, we could turn their greatest strength into their greatest vulnerability, Blackwood finished. Instead of fighting their fleets directly, we attack their ability to coordinate those fleets, create information blackouts, corrupt their databases, eliminate key personnel responsible for maintaining the system, force them back to manual coordination protocols that would slow the operations from days to weeks. Admiral Harrison studied the tactical assessment with the expression of a man who understood he was choosing between bad options and worse options. Colonel Blackwood, Earth's conventional military forces number fewer than 600 ships. The Corvan Empire fields over 8,000 vessels backed by industrial capacity that makes our entire civilization look like a mining outpost. We cannot win a traditional war, and we cannot evacuate 50 billion people from 300 worlds. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of men who had run out of conventional solutions. What you're proposing is asymmetric warfare on an interstellar scale. Information warfare, sabotage, targeted elimination of enemy command personnel. What I'm proposing is survival, sir, Blackwood replied quietly. The Corvans have made it clear that peaceful coexistence isn't an option. They need our worlds, and they're willing to commit genocide to get them. That leaves us with two choices: die as victims, or make them pay such a high price for our extermination that they decide coexistence is preferable. He activated the holographic display showing Earth's existing intelligence networks. We have assets in place, deep space reconnaissance agents who've been monitoring alien civilizations for 50 years, sleeper operatives embedded in trading missions and diplomatic contacts. We don't need to build an intelligence network from scratch. We need to reactivate the one we already have and give it new objectives. The authorization for Operation Chaos Protocol came through encrypted channels 6 hours later, along with Blackwood's appointment as operational coordinator and access to classified intelligence resources that most Earth Command officers didn't know existed. As he prepared to deploy humanity's hidden network of agents and saboteurs, Blackwood thought about the 40,000 people who had died at New Geneva, vaporized by aliens who viewed their extermination as routine population management. Their deaths had revealed the true nature of humanity's enemy and the tactics needed to survive. Now it was time to show the Corvan Empire that genocide came with a price they might not be willing to pay. 6 weeks after New Geneva, Blackwood stood in the command center of the merchant vessel Horizon Trader, watching as the ship's hidden communication arrays came online with the soft hum of advanced technology disguised as standard cargo handling equipment. The vessel appeared to be nothing more than a typical interstellar freighter carrying agricultural supplies to the Rim colonies. But beneath her cargo holds lay one of Earth's most sophisticated mobile command centers. Agent Phoenix, this is Control. Authentication code 77 Alpha. The response came through encrypted channels from deep space, carrying the voice of a man who had been living among alien civilizations since before Blackwood was born. Control, this is Phoenix. I've been monitoring Corvan fleet movements in the Proxima sector for 48 years. Never seen anything like their current operational tempo. They're processing colonization targets faster than I can track them. Agent Phoenix had been one of the first deep space reconnaissance operatives, embedded in alien trading networks when humanity was still learning that they weren't alone in the galaxy. Phoenix, your mission parameters have changed, Blackwood transmitted, feeling the weight of what he was about to authorize. We're shifting from intelligence gathering to active sabotage. Your new objective is to identify and eliminate key personnel responsible for maintaining Corvan data processing systems. database administrators, communication technicians, system analysts, anyone whose death would create information blackouts or processing delays. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds as Phoenix absorbed the implications. "Control, you're asking me to become an assassin. I've spent 5 decades building cover identities and diplomatic contacts. Once I start killing Corvan personnel, there's no going back to passive observation." Phoenix's voice carried the weight of a man who understood exactly what kind of war they were about to fight. "But I've seen what they did to New Geneva through their own communication channels. They're planning to sterilize 300 human worlds. If that's what it takes to stop them, then that's what we do." Across 17 star systems, similar conversations were taking place as Blackwood reactivated assets that Earth's government had spent half a century positioning throughout alien space. Agent Blackbird, embedded in a Corvan data processing facility on their industrial world of Kavnor Prime, reported direct access to regional coordination networks. Agent Nightfall, operating as a maintenance contractor for interstellar communication relays, possessed detailed technical knowledge of the systems that connected Corvan fleets to their central command matrix. Agent Stormcloud, working within a diplomatic mission, had gained access to high-level strategic planning sessions where colonization targets were selected and operational timelines established. "The beauty of their system is also its weakness," reported Agent Blackbird during their secure briefing. "The strategic coordination matrix processes everything through centralized data nodes. Every fleet commander receives their targeting coordinates, resource allocations, and operational timelines through the same network. If we can corrupt the data streams or create processing bottlenecks, their entire colonization program starts to break down." His technical analysis confirmed what Blackwood had suspected. The Corvans had optimized for efficiency at the cost of resilience. The first sabotage operations began 3 days later, carefully coordinated to appear like random system failures rather than deliberate attacks. Agent Nightfall introduced subtle programming errors into communication relay software, causing periodic data corruption that forced manual verification of all transmitted coordinates. Agent Blackbird eliminated a senior database administrator during what appeared to be an industrial accident, then corrupted backup files while security focused on the investigation. Agent Stormcloud used his diplomatic access to plant listening devices that allowed real-time monitoring of Corvan command decisions. Within 2 weeks, the effects began to manifest across the Corvan expansion fleets. Admiral Thrakis of the 7th Colonial Fleet found himself receiving contradictory targeting orders, with one set of coordinates directing him toward a human agricultural world, while another commanded him to bypass the system entirely. When he requested clarification through standard channels, the reply took 6 days instead of the usual 6 hours, forcing him to maintain fleet position while burning fuel and resources. Similar delays cascaded through other operational zones as the strategic coordination matrix struggled to process incomplete or corrupted data. "Fleet operations are slowing significantly," reported Agent Phoenix during a routine intelligence update. Where they used to complete colonization assessment and bombardment preparation in 48 hours, they're now taking a full week. The manual verification protocols they've implemented to counter the data corruption are creating massive administrative bottlenecks. He paused, transmitting sensor readings that showed Corvan fleets maintaining holding patterns while waiting for command authorization. But they're adapting faster than expected. 3 regional commanders have been authorized to make independent tactical decisions to reduce dependency on centralized coordination. Blackwood studied the intelligence reports from his mobile command center, feeling both satisfaction and concern at the results. The sabotage campaign was working. Corvan colonization operations had slowed by 30%, buying precious time for human evacuations and defensive preparations. But the enemy's adaptation worried him. If they continued decentralizing their command structure, the strategic coordination matrix would become less vulnerable to information warfare attacks. Agent Stormcloud's latest intelligence intercept confirmed his fears. They're implementing new protocols called Autonomous Operational Authority, he reported. Regional fleet commanders are being given broad discretionary powers to continue colonization programs even without detailed coordination from the central matrix. They're sacrificing operational efficiency to gain resilience against our sabotage efforts. The Corvan adaptation forced Blackwood to escalate his tactics sooner than planned. During an encrypted conference with his active agents, he authorized the next phase of operations. We're moving beyond data corruption and personnel elimination. Your new objectives include physical destruction of communication infrastructure, sabotage of fleet support facilities, and targeted attacks on their industrial capacity. The goal is to make their colonization programs so disruptive to their overall economy that continuing it becomes politically unsustainable. As his agents acknowledged their new mission parameters, Blackwood reflected on how quickly they had crossed lines that peacetime military doctrine would never have contemplated. They were fighting an enemy that viewed human extinction as an administrative necessity, which meant humanity's survival required tactics that conventional warfare had never imagined. The children who died at New Geneva had bought them this opportunity through their deaths. Now it was up to him and his agents to make sure those deaths led to humanity's survival rather than just delayed extinction. The war for humanity's future would be fought not on battlefields between fleets, but in the shadows of alien worlds by operatives whose names would never be recorded in history. But as Blackwood coordinated the next wave of sabotage operations, he understood that anonymity was a small price to pay for species' survival. 18 months of coordinated sabotage had transformed the Corvan Empire's efficient colonization machine into a chaotic nightmare of conflicting orders and system-wide failures. Blackwood stood in the command center of his latest mobile base, watching intelligence reports stream in from agents across the galaxy as the strategic coordination matrix finally began its death spiral. The numbers told a story of systematic breakdown. Corvan fleet operations had slowed by 60%, with some colonial expeditions completely paralyzed by contradictory targeting data. Control, this is Agent Phoenix reporting from the Corvan staging area at Nexus 7, came the transmission from deep space carrying news that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. I'm watching 3 separate colonial fleets sitting in parking orbits while their commanders argue over which set of coordinates represents legitimate orders. The 4th Fleet received targeting data for a human agricultural world, but their backup systems are telling them to attack a Corvan mining colony instead. They've been burning fuel for 6 days waiting for clarification that isn't coming. Agent Blackbird's report from Kavnor Prime painted an even more chaotic picture of the Empire's internal breakdown. The Regional Data Processing Center is experiencing cascading system failures. Every time they try to restore clean data to one sector, corrupted information propagates to 3 others. I've eliminated 14 senior technicians over the past year, and they can't train replacements fast enough to maintain their systems. His voice carried grim satisfaction. Yesterday, the 12th Colonial Fleet opened fire on the 8th Fleet because their identification codes were corrupted during transmission. 47 ships destroyed by friendly fire before they could re-establish communication. The intelligence intercepts that flooded Blackwood's command center revealed the depth of confusion spreading through Corvan space like a virus. Fleet commanders were reporting ghost orders that directed them to attack empty space, while others received targeting coordinates for planets that didn't exist. The Empire's vaunted efficiency had become its greatest weakness as automated systems propagated corrupted data faster than organic oversight could detect and correct errors. What had begun as targeted sabotage of individual components had metastasized into system-wide organizational paralysis. But Admiral Thrakis of the Corvan High Command was no ordinary military leader, and his response to the crisis demonstrated exactly why his species had conquered half the galaxy. Rather than attempting to repair the compromised strategic coordination matrix, he chose to abandon it entirely. All regional commanders are hereby granted autonomous operational authority. His transmission to the colonial fleets carried the weight of desperate pragmatism. Effective immediately, you will conduct colonization operations based on local intelligence and independent target assessment. Central coordination protocols are suspended indefinitely. The decentralization strategy sacrificed the Empire's coordinated efficiency but eliminated their vulnerability to information warfare. Individual fleet commanders could no longer be paralyzed by corrupted data streams because they were authorized to act on their own tactical judgment. Within weeks, Corvan colonization operations began to accelerate again as commanders adapted to operating without central oversight. Blackwood realized with growing alarm that his sabotage campaign had achieved its maximum possible effect. Any further attacks on information systems would be irrelevant against an enemy that had learned to function without them. The Empire's response to continued sabotage operations proved even more troubling than their tactical adaptation. Security sweeps on Corvan worlds became indiscriminate purges as paranoid officials executed suspected collaborators along with their families, co-workers, and anyone who might have had contact with human agents. Agent Stormcloud's final transmission came from a detention facility on the Corvan capital world. They're not just hunting for spies anymore. They're killing anyone who works with systems that could be sabotaged, anyone who might have access to sensitive information, anyone they suspect of insufficient loyalty to the expansion program. Mass executions eliminated thousands of innocent Corvans while making it nearly impossible for human agents to maintain their cover identities or operational effectiveness. The brutal security protocols created an atmosphere of terror that actually strengthened the Empire's resistance to subversion. Citizens became informants out of self-preservation, and officials implemented redundant verification systems that made sabotage exponentially more difficult. Blackwood's information warfare campaign had succeeded in slowing the enemy's advance, but at the cost of triggering countermeasures that would prevent similar tactics from working again. The strategic assessment that arrived from Earth Command 3 days later confirmed what Blackwood had already concluded from operational intelligence. Colonel, your sabotage operations have bought us valuable time, but they won't save our species. Admiral Harrison's message carried the weight of a man who had exhausted all conventional options. Corvan fleet operations are returning to previous efficiency levels despite continued disruption attempts. Intelligence indicates they're preparing to resume large-scale colonization within 6 months, and this time they'll be immune to information warfare. Blackwood stared at the tactical display showing 300 human worlds still marked for extermination, their populations totaling over 50 billion civilians who had no idea their deaths had been scheduled by alien bureaucrats treating genocide as an administrative necessity. The mathematics were brutally simple. Sabotage had delayed the inevitable by 18 months, but the Corvans still possessed overwhelming military superiority and the industrial capacity to sustain colonization operations indefinitely. Unless humanity found a way to make the war too costly for the Empire to continue, those worlds would fall regardless of how many communication networks were sabotaged or database administrators were eliminated. Agent Phoenix, Agent Blackbird, Agent Nightfall, Blackwood transmitted to his remaining operatives, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would transform him from soldier to terrorist. Mission parameters are changing again. Earth Command has authorized Operation Final Resolution. We're escalating from military targets to civilian infrastructure, industrial complexes, population centers, economic networks. Anything that makes the Corvan homeworlds feel safe while they're exterminating ours. The silence that followed his transmission stretched for nearly a minute as seasoned intelligence operatives absorbed the implications of total warfare. Control, you're asking us to become mass murderers, Agent Phoenix finally responded, his voice tight with the moral implications of the new orders. Once we start killing Corvan civilians, we cross a line that we can never uncross. The galaxy will remember us as the species that chose terrorism over extinction. His pause carried the weight of 5 decades spent building relationships and maintaining cover identities among the same people he was now being ordered to kill. But if that's what it takes to save 50 billion human lives, then that's what we do. Send me the target list. As Blackwood prepared the operational parameters for humanity's transition to total warfare, he thought about the children of New Geneva Colony who had been vaporized 18 months ago in the first demonstration of Corvan extermination doctrine. Their deaths had bought him the time and justification needed to build this moment, when humanity would prove that species survival justified any tactic, any sacrifice, any moral compromise necessary to ensure their children had a future. The galaxy was about to learn that pushing humanity to the brink of extinction had awakened something far more dangerous than another military opponent. The synchronized attacks began at precisely 1400 hours Galactic Standard Time across 12 major Corvan industrial worlds, each strike coordinated to maximize both physical damage and psychological impact. Blackwood monitored the operations from his command center as Agent Phoenix detonated stolen antimatter charges in the primary manufacturing complex on Thelvuk Prime, while Agent Blackbird simultaneously triggered explosions that brought down the central communications hub on Kavnor Prime. The precision and coordination of the strikes sent an unmistakable message throughout Corvan space. Humanity could reach their enemies anywhere, anytime, regardless of military protection or strategic importance. Target 1 is neutralized, Agent Phoenix reported, as his tactical display showed the complete destruction of Thelvok Prime's industrial sector. Estimated civilian casualties exceed 150,000. The manufacturing complex employed workers from across the planet, and secondary explosions have destroyed the surrounding residential districts. His voice carried no satisfaction, only grim professionalism in reporting mass murder committed in humanity's name. Control, they're broadcasting emergency signals across every communication channel. This isn't just an industrial strike, it's a demonstration that their home worlds are as vulnerable as our colonies were. Agent Blackbird's simultaneous attack on Kavnor Prime proved even more devastating to Corvan's strategic capabilities. Communications nexus is completely destroyed, he transmitted, as orbital sensors confirmed the elimination of the planet's primary data processing center. Without this facility, 17 colonial fleets will lose contact with Central Command within hours, but Control, there were civilian contractors in the building when I triggered the charges, families of work. There's children in the facility's educational center. My estimate puts civilian casualties at over 200,000, including thousands of non-combatants. The other 10 strikes followed the same pattern. Agent Nightfall eliminated a crucial defense satellite manufacturing facility. Agent Stormcloud destroyed a major economic planning center, and 8 additional operatives simultaneously struck industrial targets whose destruction would cripple the Empire's ability to sustain large-scale military operations. By the end of the coordinated assault, over 2 million Corvan civilians were dead, their industrial capacity was severely damaged, and their home worlds had experienced the same sudden, devastating attacks that had characterized their own expansion program. The psychological impact on Corvan society proved even more significant than the physical destruction. For generations, the Empire's citizens had supported territorial expansion because they viewed it as a remote administrative process that didn't affect their daily lives. The colonization of human worlds had been presented as routine population management, no more morally significant than clearing agricultural pests from farmland. But when their own cities began exploding without warning, when their own children started dying in attacks that struck at the heart of their civilization, the abstract concept of expansion warfare became a terrifying personal reality. Intelligence intercepts from Corvan civilian communication networks revealed the depth of panic spreading through their society. My daughter worked in the Thelvuk Manufacturing Center, one intercepted message read. Yesterday she was processing production quotas for colonial fleet supplies. Today there's nothing left but a crater where her office used to be. They told us the human worlds were uninhabited, that we were just claiming empty territory. They never said the humans would come for our families. Public opinion broadcasts from Corvan media outlets showed a civilization grappling with the sudden realization that their vast empire had become a strategic liability rather than a source of security. The human terrorist attacks demonstrate that military superiority means nothing against an enemy willing to target civilian populations, one prominent Corvan analyst observed. Our colonial fleets may control thousands of star systems, but every one of those systems now represents a potential target for retaliation. We cannot defend everything simultaneously, and the humans have proven they can strike anywhere. The political ramifications of the attacks rippled through Corvan leadership circles as civilian populations began demanding an end to expansion programs that had made them targets for human retaliation. Admiral Thrakis found himself facing the choice between continued colonization operations that served long-term species survival and immediate security measures to protect his civilization's core worlds from terrorist attacks. The mathematics were brutal. He could either commit enormous resources to defending against asymmetric warfare or redirect those resources toward negotiating a territorial settlement that would preserve both species. The humans have changed the nature of this conflict, Thrakis admitted during an intercepted strategic planning session. We are no longer fighting for territorial expansion against a weaker opponent. We are engaged in total warfare against an enemy that has proven capable of striking our most vital infrastructure despite our overwhelming military advantage. Every day we continue this campaign, we risk additional attacks on our civilian population centers. Blackwood's decision to broadcast footage of the Corvan casualties to major galactic powers served as both a warning and a demonstration of humanity's strategic doctrine. The transmissions showed the burning ruins of Corvan cities, the casualty reports from industrial complexes, and the faces of alien civilians who had died in attacks designed to terrorize an entire civilization into abandoning their expansion program. This is the cost of attempting to exterminate humanity, Blackwood's message declared to every major empire in the galaxy. Military superiority means nothing against opponents willing to embrace total warfare for species survival. The galactic response to humanity's demonstration of asymmetric terrorism proved that other civilizations were paying careful attention to the strategic lessons emerging from the conflict. The Zelanti Empire quietly adjusted their own expansion policies to avoid systems with established populations, while the Morganthia Confederacy began negotiations with potential target species before initiating colonization programs. Across the galaxy, advanced civilizations recognized that forced displacement of established populations now carried unacceptable risks of triggering similar campaigns of systematic retaliation. More importantly, the attacks had shifted the strategic calculus from military conquest to economic sustainability. The Corvan Empire could undoubtedly continue their colonization program despite human resistance, but the cost of defending their home worlds against ongoing terrorist attacks would consume resources needed for expansion operations. Their choice was stark: commit to a decades-long campaign of mutual attrition that would bankrupt both civilizations, or negotiate a territorial settlement that preserved both species while serving their core survival needs. As intelligence reports confirmed that secret negotiations had begun between Corvan leadership and neutral galactic powers, Blackwood reflected on the transformation that 18 months of warfare had wrought in both civilizations. Humanity had evolved from passive victims of systematic extermination into a species capable of galactic-scale terrorism to ensure their survival. The Corvans had learned that military superiority provided no protection against enemies, willing to die rather than submit to extinction. Neither side had achieved victory in any conventional sense, but both had demonstrated the capacity for mutual annihilation that made continued conflict too dangerous for rational consideration. The children who had died at New Geneva Colony had been avenged by the deaths of 2 million Corvan civilians, but their real legacy lay in the strategic reality that no empire would ever again consider human extermination a routine administrative procedure. In a galaxy where strength was measured by willingness to embrace total warfare, humanity had earned its place not through moral superiority, but through demonstrated capacity for making genocide mutual. 3 years after the last Corvan industrial complex burned under human terrorist attacks, the ceasefire negotiations concluded in the neutral waters of deep space aboard a converted mining station that had been hastily retrofitted for diplomatic purposes. Admiral Thrakis sat across the conference table from Colonel Blackwood, both men bearing the physical and psychological scars of a war that had pushed two civilizations to the brink of mutual annihilation. The final territorial accords spread across their shared display showed the pragmatic mathematics of exhaustion. Humanity would retain control of their existing 300 worlds, while the Corvan Empire redirected their expansion efforts toward uninhabited systems in the Galactic Rim territories. Neither of our species achieved what we originally sought, Thrakis observed as he reviewed the settlement terms one final time. My people needed habitable worlds to prevent ecological collapse, while yours needed security from extermination. We have traded conquest for coexistence, expansion for stability. His compound eyes studied Blackwood with something approaching professional respect. The cost of continued war, fair, would have bankrupted both our civilizations while serving neither's fundamental survival needs. Blackwood nodded, understanding that the agreement represented pragmatic acceptance of strategic stalemate rather than any form of victory celebration. The mathematics were brutally clear. Humanity had proven capable of making Corvan expansion operations prohibitively expensive through sustained terrorism, while the Corvans retained enough military superiority to eventually overcome human resistance at costs neither civilization could afford. My people learned that survival sometimes requires tactics that peacetime military doctrine never contemplates, he replied. Your people learned that overwhelming force means nothing against opponents facing extinction. We both paid prices we never wanted to pay. The territorial boundaries established by the Accords reflected the new strategic reality that had emerged from 3 years of asymmetric warfare. Corvan expansion fleets would avoid any system with established populations, focusing instead on terraforming uninhabited worlds that required significant investment but avoided the risk of triggering retaliatory campaigns. Humanity would maintain their existing colonies while accepting that their survival depended on the continued credible threat of terrorist retaliation rather than conventional military deterrence. Both civilizations understood that the peace they had negotiated was based on mutual fear rather than mutual respect, but mutual fear had proven more effective than diplomacy in preventing mutual annihilation. The establishment of the Interstellar Threat Assessment Bureau 6 months after the ceasefire formalized Blackwood's transition from wartime terrorist coordinator to peacetime intelligence director. Operating from a secure facility in the Titan system, the Bureau maintained the same network of deep space agents who had conducted sabotage operations during the war, but their mission had evolved from active warfare to strategic monitoring. The infrastructure built for asymmetric conflict now served as an early warning system designed to identify potential threats before they reached existential levels. Agent Phoenix, this is Control. Your new mission parameters focus on threat assessment rather than active intervention, Blackwood transmitted during one of his regular coordination sessions with field operatives. We're monitoring Corvan compliance with territorial accords while identifying potential new expansion programs that could threaten human interests. The goal is intelligence gathering and early warning, not sabotage operations. The shift from offensive terrorism to defensive monitoring represented both a relief and a challenge for agents who had spent years living as assassins and saboteurs. Agent Phoenix's response reflected the complex psychological adjustment required for operatives transitioning from wartime to peacetime roles. Control, after 3 years of killing Corvan personnel and destroying their infrastructure, it feels strange to return to passive observation. But the intelligence networks we built during the war have evolved into something unprecedented, a galaxy-spanning early warning system that can detect potential threats decades before they reach critical levels. His analysis confirmed what Blackwood had suspected. The capabilities developed for asymmetric warfare provided strategic advantages that extended far beyond the original conflict. The Bureau's monitoring capabilities expanded to cover not just Corvan activities but potential threats from dozens of other major civilizations. Agent Blackbird established observation posts throughout the Zelanti Empire's territorial boundaries, while Agent Nightfall infiltrated the Morganthia Confederacy's expansion planning committees. The same techniques used to sabotage Corvan operations now provided unprecedented insight into galactic political and military developments, transforming humanity from a passive victim of larger powers into an active intelligence force capable of influencing interstellar events. Coordination with deep space agents revealed the broader strategic implications of humanity's demonstration of asymmetric warfare capabilities. Other civilizations are adjusting their expansion policies based on our example, Agent Stormcloud reported from his new assignment monitoring the Hegemony Coalition. They've classified forced population displacement as a Class X strategic risk that carries unacceptable potential for triggering terrorist campaigns. Several major powers have begun negotiating with established populations before initiating colonization programs. The galactic strategic landscape had been fundamentally altered by humanity's willingness to embrace total warfare for species survival. Advanced civilizations that had previously treated territorial expansion as a routine exercise in superior force projection now understood that military advantage provided no protection against opponents facing extinction. The mathematical certainty of overwhelming conventional superiority had been replaced by the terrifying unpredictability of asymmetric conflict, creating a new strategic doctrine where genocide campaigns were recognized as prohibitively dangerous regardless of military capability ratios. Blackwood's final intelligence briefing 3 years after the ceasefire painted a picture of interstellar politics transformed by the recognition that advanced technology and numerical superiority meant nothing against enemies willing to die rather than submit. Galactic expansion patterns have shifted toward uninhabited systems and negotiated settlements, he reported to Earth Command. The cost of forced displacement now includes the risk of decades-long terrorist campaigns that can bankrupt civilizations regardless of their military advantages. The transformation from wartime terrorism to peacetime deterrence represented humanity's evolution from desperate victims to strategic players capable of influencing galactic events through the credible threat of asymmetric retaliation. Earth's children would grow up in a galaxy where their species was neither conqueror nor victim, but simply another civilization that had proven survival sometimes required tactics that civilized societies preferred not to contemplate. Standing in the observation deck of the Threat Assessment Bureau, watching intelligence data stream in from agents positioned throughout the galaxy, Blackwood understood that this was what victory actually looked like in the real universe. Not the triumphant domination of military conquest, but the hard-won recognition that some species were too dangerous to corner, too unpredictable to control, and too willing to embrace mutual destruction to ever be safely ignored. The 40,000 people who died at New Geneva Colony had been avenged not through military victory, but through the establishment of a strategic reality where no civilization would ever again consider human extermination a routine administrative procedure. In a galaxy governed by power and fear, humanity had earned its survival through the demonstrated willingness to make genocide mutual, and that reputation would protect their children long after the specific tactics that created it had been forgotten. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more intense HFY warfare. Now we want to hear from you. If humanity's survival depended on your strategic decision, would you choose Blackwood's path of asymmetric terrorism or try to find another way to stop the Corvan extermination program? Drop your tactical analysis in the comments. We read every single one and love seeing your strategic thinking. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY. See you in the next story where the stakes are just as high and the solutions just as desperate.